Hey, I'm Scott Jones from Emeals, and you're listening to Real Food for Real Life. On this episode, I talk with Madeline Puckette, an author, a wine expert, and the brains behind one of my favorite websites, winefolly.com.
You know, everybody's physiology is a little bit different, but when you look at wine as a beverage, it's actually possibly the best choice for if you're looking to be on an altered diet where you're trying to reduce your carb intake and trying to be really, really smart with how much you're consuming so you can control your calories, so you can really, really be in that ketosis state.
Madeline and I explore the connection between wine and the keto diet. Madeline shares her secrets for finding keto wines and actually explains what makes a wine keto-friendly, along with a few other wonderful tidbits that will help you pick just the right wine that fits your flavor preferences and your budget. Now, before we get to the interview, I have a few housekeeping items. First, send us your questions and comments. We read all of them. And if you have a suggestion for a future guest or a potential topic, I'd love to know that too. You can find us on Twitter @Emeals using the hashtag #AskEmeals. We also have an email address. It's community@emeals.com. If you don't already subscribe to our podcast, subscribe today. It's simple to do. You can find us at itunes.com/podcast/Real Food for Real Life. And while you're there, leave us a review. And finally, if you'd like more information on Emeals and our variety of meal plan food styles, you can find us at emeals.com. Try any of our meal plans free for 2 weeks, be it paleo, clean eating, or gluten-free. You can even have your shopping list sent directly to Walmart pickup at no charge, so your groceries are waiting for you. That's it. On with the show. Hey, Madeline, welcome to Real Food for Real Life. How's it going today?
It's super great.
Well, I am really excited to have you on. Not only have I been a longtime fan of everything that you do, Wine Folly, I think, is just the coolest site for all things wine. But before we get into it, for those folks who are our listeners who don't know about you, tell us about Wine Folly and how you actually got into the wine business.
Well, it's a story. I don't know if many people, unless they're born into the wine business, go about it a normal way. It's not really something you think to do.
Right.
You know, when you turn 21, alcohol seems like a negative thing that you finally get to do, and maybe some binge drinking happens in your early 20s and you go, well, that's dangerous. So by the time I was about 25, 26, I moved. I was working in Reno, Nevada as a designer, and I went into it was 2008. The market started crashing, and they were starting to outsource a lot of the jobs in my department to Bangalore, India. And I went, and then one day I walked in, and they're like, the manager wants to talk to you, and she sits me down, and she's got tears in her eyes, and I'm so sorry, Madeline, but we have to lay you off, and I'm really, you'll get some unemployment, but, you're going to do better things. And I was kind of shocked because, I was working for a newspaper, and, it already felt very dead in the newspaper. It was, some people had gotten laid off, weeks prior.
Right.
And I went into this wine bar to sort of drink my sorrows away and started talking with the owner, and he's like, hey, I've owned this wine bar since the last 4 months, and I really haven't had a day off. Did you want to maybe come help here?
Really?
So
no
I
kidding.
Started working there. He threw down like a couple of heavy books in front of me, and he's like, if you read these books and come back, and I'm going to quiz you, we'll just have a conversation. I'll give you the job. And I started working under the table cash, basically polishing glassware. And that's how I got into the wine business in Reno, Nevada, of all places.
No kidding. Do you remember what those books were that he gave you?
Oh, gosh. It was Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia by Tom Stevenson.
Yeah.
And there was another book. which shall remain nameless because I
Yeah.
can't remember the name. I remember slogging through these books and being practically bored to tears until I got my hands on the World Atlas of Wine
Right.
by Hugh
Yeah.
Johnson
Yeah. Yeah.
and Jancis Robinson, and
Great
that
book.
book is actually pretty good. She's a lot more positive about wine.
Yeah.
And these other wines were very negative. They were like, well, that one's crap and this one's no good and you only want to drink this and that, and they were all really expensive bottles of wine. So it felt so hard, unobtainable, basically.
Right.
In order to be good at wine, you had to drink expensive wine. And I could see, working in this wine bar, that was not true. The owner of the wine bar was buying basically wines between $7 and $15 wholesale,
Right.
which would mean they were anywhere from $10 to $25 retail, which is not that expensive.
Right.
And these wines were fantastic. We had 50 wines by the glass, and I was tasting every day. And then the distributors would start to come in and introduce me to new varieties I'd never even heard of. And they're like, we just can't sell them. Nobody wants to buy Honda Zuri from, Rias, from País Vasco in Spain, and nobody knows about, these unpronounceable grape varieties.
Right.
And I just dug it. I was so into it, and I was so into exploring all these new varieties and learning about these different regions and what they were all about and figuring out what they really tasted like. I started creating these little note cards for myself that were really visual, and it eventually led to me creating a visual wine blog to help people get into wine who were like me, maybe didn't have a whole lot to spend, but realized I could buy some pretty good wine. And that was back in 2011 I started Wine Folly, and so it's been a good run, and we're still at it.
Yeah, I have to say, for those who have never been to your website, I would definitely encourage folks to visit, if for nothing else, but to see the amazing graphics that you create. I mean, the way that you're able to combine art and wine information to make it easily digestible and easy to understand. You really have a real gift for putting it into terms that even if you're just ice cold new to wine, it's easy to really, you might not understand everything, but it's really easy to learn visually the way that you present your blog post and in your book and through your posters and all that stuff. It's really phenomenal, I have to say. And that leads me to why I wanted to have you on the podcast today, because for those who already subscribe to your newsletter, they know all of the cool blog posts that you're doing. And you had one a few weeks ago called The Realist Guide to Keto Wines. And I thought that was not only thought-provoking, but very timely, because keto seems to be all the rage these days, and certainly people are still enjoying wines. And from an Emeals perspective, we know that many of our subscribers are very interested in keto. Many of them are trying the ketogenic diet for the first time, and I thought, who better to talk about keto and wine than you? And so I guess I would start out by asking, Madeline, can they coexist?
This is a good question. I think so. Everybody's physiology is a little bit different, but when you look at wine as a beverage, it's actually possibly the best choice for if you're looking to be on an altered diet where you're trying to reduce your carb intake and trying to be really, really smart with how much you're consuming so you can control your calories, so you can really, really be in that ketosis state, or producing a high level of ketones.
Yeah.
And the reason I got inspired to do this article was because a friend of mine, a guy, actually a former employee who was doing our social media, doing a great job, he was on essentially this diet. It was very new, and we are trying this thing. Me and my wife are trying this thing. I've got to do something for my health. And he was pretty overweight. And by the time we started working together, he'd already lost something like 27, 28 pounds.
Wow.
And he looked fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, he still had a little ways to go, but he was sticking with the program. And he's like, I'm really excited to be working with you because then I can get to drink more wine. I can learn more about which wines I should try, because they were really going to fit with my diet. I used to be a beer guy, And since beer is really out of the question, I'm starting to look at wine. And so it worked out really well for him. And he was still maintaining the diet while working with me. And so that's what sort of inspired me, was our conversations together was to make this article. And the thing about wine is that it's essentially carb-free. In theory, when you pick up a bottle of wine, it says it's a dry wine. Dry means not sweet.
Right.
We generally assume, well, that means it has no sugar. Now, that isn't exactly the case, but it's mostly true. And in this article, so what I try to do is, well, what's the actual truth? Like, if I was to just go out and buy a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio or Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon or Zinfandel, am I actually getting a dry wine? And what are the best wines for me to get if I'm actually practicing this keto diet? And I wanted to be realistic and fair, because some people are very, very serious about their diet.
Yeah.
And maybe even won't have alcohol for a period of a month or 2 months while they're really deep in it. So if they're tapering back on to having a drink or two at night, what are maybe the best wines for them? And what I discovered, and in my course of running the blog, is that not all dry wines that they say they're dry, because there are no wine isn't controlled by the USDA. It's actually controlled by the Tobacco and Trade Bureau, the TTB. So they don't require that they put nutrition data on bottles of wine. So you actually don't know how much sugar is in the wine. And by sugar, I mean residual grape sugar. It's actually from the grape. It's a type of a grape sugar that's in the wine.
Madeline, let me jump in here just for those folks who haven't spent a lot of time in a winery. The sugar is needed, right, to it's sugar, the yeast, create the fermentation. That's where you get the alcohol from. And as the fermentation goes on, the amount of sugar is reduced until the little yeast don't have much sugar to eat anymore. And then you have this dry wine. But what you're saying is that even when it's dry, all of the sugar is not fermented out. And that's where you get the term residual sugar. Is that right?
That's right. And so here's the thing. You take a bunch of grapes, and wine grapes are not like grocery store grapes. They're actually a lot sweeter. And you mash them up, and then you wait, and then sure enough, a whole bunch of different yeasts come in, or you can add yeast too if you want, but it just happens naturally. Actually, if you just have a bucket, yeast will come in and start to ferment without you even trying. And the type of yeast, it's the same as beer yeast. It's Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Will come in and it'll eat up all the little sugars, and it poops out alcohol. It's a magical yeast. We love it. And in the case of a lot of dry wines, what they'll do is the winemaker has control at this stage. If the wine is, through the fermentation, if it gets to a point where it's like, it's really tasting good. And the thing about this amount of residual sugar, it's very, very low. I'm talking about maybe 10 grams per liter. So
probably hard to perceive as sweet.
It's 0.1%. It's very, very small. So like at around 10 grams per liter, he tastes the wine and he's like, at such a low amount, it's almost more like body. It's like a spoonful of sugar. It's almost like presents itself more like body. It's like maybe if in your coffee, it would be like a half or a quarter of a teaspoon of sugar. Like it's a very, very low. So like it just, you taste it more as a mouthfeel. And so when the winemaker is making the wine and he wants to have a wine that goes to market that is well liked, he tastes it and he realizes, with 3 grams per liter, which is, 0.03%, this is actually tasting really delicious, and this is what I want to make for my dry wine. Now, at 0.03%, you have about maybe a little less than 1 gram of carbs per serving. So it's not zero, but it is some. And what I've noticed in the wines that I've looked at, and I did a big poll. I basically polled a lot of popular wines that are in the grocery stores now in America, which are primarily American wines. They are both primarily
like varietal wines and blends? Because I know blends are so popular and they can have lots of different things in them.
So they can be red, like a red blend from Washington, or a California Cabernet, or a Merlot, or something like that. I started pulling data and information, like Menage a Trois is a good example of a wine that
Right.
has
Super popular everywhere.
multiple grape varieties in it, and it's making a red blend, and it ranges anywhere from 12 to 15 grams per liter of residual sugar, which is about 12 to 15. That's like 1.2 to 1.5%, which ends up in your glass to be 2 to 3 grams per serving. So if you're pouring yourself a glass of wine,
carbs,
of carbs.
right?
So when you're buying Menage a Trois, you think it's a dry wine, but you taste it tastes fruity. It's just that tiny bit of sugar that makes it have that fruity flavor. So when I talk to people who are like, you know what, I don't want any of that. I want 100% dry wines. Don't give me any sugar at all. I generally go, well, you might look to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
You might look to a cooler climate in Europe like France,
mm-hmm.
where they don't really have enough residual sugar. It's not really sunny there, so they don't have a lot of sugar in the grapes to go around. So they're going to ferment it totally dry so they can get an alcohol level that's
right.
doable.
I see.
So like you go to a cool climate like France, or maybe Oregon in America, where
mm-hmm.
you got a lot of Pinot Noir, and they're going to ferment it pretty dry because they it's a little less sun than sunny California, and they're going to produce a wine with maybe a little less residual sugar overall, or maybe none at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a palate thing. These wines will taste more tart. They'll taste a little bit more bitter too, especially with red wines.
Right.
That residual sugar does a lot to sort of mitigate the perception of bitterness in tannin in wines.
Mm-hmm.
And red wines all have tannin, and tannin is that astringent drying sensation on the palate. And so it's really interesting when you start drinking 100% dry wines. You realize, well, wine's a very different thing. It's not as fruity. It's not this fruity fruit thing that I thought it was. It's dry. It's mineral. It's tart. It's
right.
It's elegant. It has these savory flavors associated with it. So you might look to France for some answers for something that's really dry. Or another thing you can do if you are a little bit of a sleuth on the internet is start looking for tech sheets or data sheets or info sheets on the wine. And they'll actually put in, I always search for like
That's
RS.
Right. Yeah.
It's like a little secret. It's the RS in the wine. And a lot of people will indicate the RS level of the wine
right.
in their technical information.
And
so
you can
if you
find
really
that like on the winery's website, right?
Yeah, on the winery's website.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. They'll have it'll be like a tasting sheet, but it'll give you stuff like the pH level, that's the acidity level,
right.
the total acidity in the wine,
Got it.
and the RS oftentimes, and the alcohol level. Another thing, and I don't want to say this because everybody likes to have their appropriate serving of booze, but a little lower alcohol level goes a long way, I think, in these wines.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to stick to a keto diet, so if you're drinking like 13.5% or less, that's probably going to treat you better. And the reason being is when I was doing research on this keto, I found this one guy blogging online, and he actually started monitoring how many ketones he was producing over the amount of drinks he had. And he said over 2 drinks, and this is a male this guy wrote this thing, over 2 drinks, his ketone production level dropped substantially. And if you look at what moderation is for men and women, the American Cancer Society, the American Association, the Heart Association, they both recommend moderation as sort of your good go-to trustworthy source of like, if you want to drink at all, you should probably drink in moderation. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, for men, it's to drink no more than 2 glasses of wine. And for women, it's
right.
drink no more than 1. So I wonder, and I don't know because there's no studies really supporting this yet, but that I've seen, I wonder if maybe there's something there that ketone production drops substantially after you go over your moderation limit is maybe an indicator of your ability to handle that much and metabolize that much alcohol through
right.
the metabolizing features you have in your body. And and I'm probably overwhelming you with too much information, but for men, you have these in your body, you have alcohol dehydrogenase in your stomach and in your liver. And that is what actually does the primary amount of work metabolizing alcohol in your body. So it doesn't run through your same calorie cycle as your stomach. And thus it doesn't really get absorbed in the same way. So you're not absorbing the alcohol calories in the same way. And then with women, we don't actually have alcohol dehydrogenase in our stomach, which is why we should drink less, which sucks, by the way, for me, because I do like a glass or two of wine. Yeah. But if I want to be moderate and I want to stick to a diet, I would restrict myself to 2 half glasses a night.
I see. Well, I like the way you're approaching that. So
because I like to.
Yeah. No, it's got to be the artist in you. So you've talked about a lot of really interesting things, and I have a number of questions I wanna ask to clarify some things. But the first will be, you mentioned looking for wines as part of this kind of strategy from perhaps from cooler regions. You were talking mostly about red wines because you mentioned tannins. So what about those folks who, say, drink white wines from cooler climates like New Zealand or Austria, Germany? Are we talking, because those, I guess, for many wine drinkers, those regions are probably thought of as white wine regions for Sauvignon Blanc or Riesling, Gewürztraminer. So are you really saying that it should be red wines from cooler regions?
I'm saying red wines from cooler regions. Here's some funny facts about white wines. You're right, it's a bit different. The thing about white wines that I've noticed is that they almost more often than not, you could be pretty safe and bet that no matter what glass of white wine you're having, there's a couple that don't, and I'm going to pick on Europe. I'm going to pick Europe again just for the easy answer, although it's not always the right answer. But you can almost bet that white wines will have about 3 grams of carbs per serving in them, because I've noticed when I did a poll, I was like, okay, New Zealand, cool climate, make Sauvignon Blanc. Well, their wines they have such high acidity that in order for them not to just taste like sour lemon juice, they leave a gram or 2 of residual sugar in there. And I've seen, big brands like Kim Crawford have like 7 to 10, 7 to 12, something like that, grams per liter of residual sugar in them, which would say that they have about 3 or so carbs per serving. So
about 50% to 100% more than the red wines in terms of carbs.
Possibly. Yeah. And what's funny is then I started looking at Chardonnay, and I looked at what I thought was probably, what I would say is like the biggest, Chardonnay. It's got to have residual sugar. It's got to be real bad for you. I was determined, and I pulled up Cupcake Vineyards Chardonnay, which I think is like cupcake. It tastes like a cupcake. Like it's got to be sweet. And sure enough, it only had 6 grams per liter, which is only 0.9 carbs per serving. And it's a California Chardonnay, and by gum, they make it pretty darn dry. So I almost wonder if Chardonnay, because we like it dry and we like it that buttery style, which is actually not butter, it's from an interaction that happens when they're aging in oak barrels. This little bacteria gets in there and it eats the acid that's in the grapes that tastes like apple acid, and it poops out this like acid that tastes more like what the acid in milk. Milk is slightly acidic, and that's how it makes it have this buttery smell. So sure enough, we like our Chardonnays pretty dry. And if you're drinking a Chardonnay and it tends to have sort of more butter notes and it tastes dry and it's not on the butterscotch, when you're reading tasting notes, avoid the ones that are like pineapple and butterscotch as sort of tasting notes, and lean more towards the like lemon, apple, butter, that type of profile. You're going to probably be finding a wine that is got minimal residual sugar. And again, I was really surprised to see Cupcake Vineyards had a great rating for a keto diet. In my opinion, 1 carb per glass, you know,
who knew?
And I wouldn't even think I was a fan of them, but it honestly made me appreciate this brand a little bit more. To see that.
Yeah, and I wonder with the whole, this growth of not just keto but low carb in general and paleo, if winemakers aren't somehow either consciously or subconsciously making certain wines maybe less sweet
I think they are.
than they may have done in the past.
I think they are. We're seeing a huge move, and it's happening from Germany. Dry Riesling is really, really growing in popularity.
Right.
And big difference. Very different wine. When you drink Riesling dry, it's a very, very different wine. It's much more like a Pinot Grigio in its style, and it's quite wonderful. And so I feel like you're absolutely right. There is a demand in the marketplace for very dry wines, and producers are stepping it up and making their wines taste more dry. And consumers are accepting the flavors that go along with it. We want that tart mouth, cleansing taste.
Yeah, sure.
That astringent tannin that helps clear your palate. I mean, if you're eating a keto diet, you're eating fatty foods, right? And you want to actually cleanse your palate. And if you have a tannin in your wine, a dry red wine with little tannin, it acts as it cleans the proteins and the fats actually off your tongue.
Right.
So it makes it
Right.
an amazing pairing for this diet. It's a fabulous pairing. And it's probably why one of the arguments for the paradox diet
Right.
was so strong. It's sort of wine is sort of this like scraper through your gut.
Yeah.
And it just sort of like cleans you out in a weird way. So I don't know. Again, more research should be done. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Tannin in general is a fascinating topic. You can get it in tea, iced tea. You can get it in walnuts and in many other foods out there. So I wouldn't just point to wine as the only answer.
Right. Okay. Then now you really got me thinking about the whole pairing game. What about residual sugar in things like sparkling wine and rosé, European rosés? Are those, because I think of most rosés as being pretty dry. Like if I think about rosés from the south of France, for example, I tend to think of those as being pretty dry. And then, you have, brut sparkling wines. Are those also things that you might want to look up on the winery's website to see if they might fit into a more celebratory side of the keto diet?
Oh, for sure. That's actually a great point. This is a funny question. I recently heard something from a champagne producer that kind of shocked me, but I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. But with rosés and, Provence is one of the largest producers of rosé in the world, Provence, France. And for the most part, they're made in a dry style. So you can do pretty well to bet on that. I would always encourage people to look at the information. Some of the bigger brands will sneak in a gram or two of residual sugar because they know that's what the marketplace desires. We humans, we love our sugar.
Yep.
We do love it. And so I would, again, pay attention to that. But, if you're getting a smaller producer, you can bet that they're just focusing on producing quality grapes and they're probably fermenting to dry. So with sparkling wine, you have a little bit of an easier time for the most part. I will say I'll bring in this one side point that will make you confused. It makes me confused. But brut or less, brut has a rule. You can have no more than 12 grams for residual sugar. That's 1.2%.
Right.
And that's really not that bad,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of alcohol, of carbs. So that puts it at like 1.8 carbs per serving, So if you're drinking brut, now here's a fun fact. If you're drinking extra brut, that is only allowed to have 6 grams per liter,
Right.
which would put it right under 1 gram of carbs per serving. So extra brut is a good, clean thing to say. And I will say Prosecco, the most popular Prosecco in the world, La Marca, or in the U.S., is
that beautiful powder blue label.
Yeah, the baby blue. That one is called extra dry, and I would say avoid that.
That's right.
Extra dry is not extra brut. Extra dry is a misnomer. It's actually sweeter than brut. It has 17 to 32 grams per liter, so it's a lot more.
Correct. Right.
So you
So
want to
let me just pause right here and have you explain that one more time. So just for those at home, listening,
write this down.
Brut. Most would you agree that the vast majority of sparkling wine made in the world is probably made in the Brut style, but extra Brut is more dry, extra dry is more sweet.
I know it sounds weird, but it's true.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So stick to the Brut, extra Brut. Anything with Brut.
Anything with Brut. There you go. Anything with Brut.
Anything with Brut. There's even another more strict, which is Brut Nature or Brut Zero. That means it has 3 grams or less. But anything with dry or extra dry, avoid that. That doesn't mean it's actually dry.
Got it. Yeah, no, this is all good. I mean, I at least among my friend set and the people that I just meet, I feel like folks are enjoying sparkling wine. There are a lot of great values out there, and the idea that you could be on a carb restricted diet, certainly keto diet, and enjoy a glass of sparkling wine from time to time is pretty cool.
Yeah. So one area that I like to recommend for that is super great value is the Cava region in Spain. Spain makes sparkling wine. It's made in the same process of champagne, but you can find a great Cava for around $10 to $15 a bottle. And they're usually made in the Brut style or more. Right. So extra Brut or Brut Nature. And super great value, an amazing, probably keto-friendly wine. Now, the one little caveat that I hate to throw this in, but this champagne producer told me, he's like, we have this rule set for the Brut and extra Brut and that sort of thing. And what it is it's the amount of sugar they add back into the wine at the end of the secondary fermentation, which produces the bubbles in the bottle.
Yes.
What he told me, what they don't equate is the residual sugar of the wine that gets made into the sparkling wine. So if you go in with a wine that has a little bit of grams per liter of residual sugar, and then you make it into a sparkling wine, and then you add back in residual sugar, that doesn't, you might be cheating a little bit. I don't know what to do with this information other than the rules that are out there in the world are never clear and never true, and we can't really trust a true thing. But I will say, if it tastes dry and it tastes really tart and it's really refreshing, it's probably going to have less residual sugar and more stringent than a wine that tastes very fruity and fruit forward. So if it really trust your palate and pay attention to what you're tasting, and you're really going to taste it when you sip that wine. It's going to be that first moment when you taste that wine. Our mouths are really stupid at tasting sugar. We have like 26 bitter receptors in our mouth and 1 for sugar. Yeah. So,
well, I guess that was because we don't want to eat bitter. I guess was historically associated with like danger.
Yeah, exactly. So we got really good at tasting bitterness, but not very good at tasting sweet, which is why we like sweet of all kinds, but we're not really good at identifying it on our palates, which is why I think we can't taste these small amounts. But again, I'm really excited to say that for the most part, dry wines, even if you're up to 30, you're still not doing that bad per glass. Right. If you buy a dry wine, or if you mess up and have a glass of wine, you can maybe add 4 at the worst, 4 carbs to your little tally at the end of the day. Yeah. And just shake it off, and you'll do better tomorrow. Get back. Put your cart back on the track, as my husband always tells me. Yeah. Yeah,
and I guess that's that. I guess when we step away from it, I mean, it's fun to talk about these things, but at the end of the day, it's part of an overall lifestyle, and 1 or 2 days slightly off track doesn't derail the journey of the lifestyle. So I think it's important for folks not to get have too much tunnel vision around this. And also, I guess for most of us too, it's not like we're drinking every single day, 7 days a week. To your point, it's probably done in moderation and doing it judiciously.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Being, this whole diet thing is really about our own ability to stick to a disciplined program that we build for ourselves. And it takes planning. And then it takes the discipline part, which is the hardest part. Yeah. I know, because I've been on diets before. I've definitely done the dieting game and changed an entire lifestyle behavior, because of that. And And now I can't even imagine going back. Like
Right.
it's so ingrained into the way I think and prepare food and order food. Like I don't even want the things that I used to crave so much, when I was not, going through this dieting process.
Right.
So if you stick to it, there will be positive results. You will get to the next level, and it gets easier.
Yes.
Well,
listen, this is coming from a sommelier, so there's definitely authority and validation stamped on that when you have a title that's so hard to pronounce, like sommelier.
Yeah, sommelier.
But Madeline, this has been fantastic. This is really helpful, and I hope encourages many of our listeners who might have been on the fence about whether or not they could actually enjoy wine with a keto diet. And then if they decided to put a toe in the water, getting this great advice to help them kind of navigate how they might be looking for wines in their local wine store or grocery store or at a restaurant. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Real Food for Real Life. Subscribe today and you'll never miss another episode. You'll also have access to past episodes with terrific guests ranging from cookbook authors to paleo experts, clean eating experts, to fitness pros. You can find us at itunes.com/podcast/Real Food for Real Life. And when you subscribe, be sure to leave us a review. You can also find us on other popular podcast apps like Stitcher and Google Play Music. If you have questions about this episode or our podcast, feel free to email me at community@emeals.com, or you can tweet them to me at Emeals using the hashtag #AskEmeals. To get more information on Emeals and our variety of meal plans, visit us at emeals.com. Until next time, I'm Scott Jones. Thanks for listening.